Hello class, what follows is an explication of The Secret Lion by Alvaro Rios. You'll want to have read the story before you dive in so you know what I'm talking about. The slides for this section of things is going to be a sort of outline to follow, as well as a list of key exemplary quotes for you to consider and for me to kind of shape for you and model how you would put together a literary analysis like I've asked you to do. So read the stories and then see how you understand my comments. So there's a few possibilities for pre-rating here. Our title, like I've gone into, serves the effects of most titles to either tell you what to focus on, what to look out for, what to consider before you dive right in. So you'll want to think, what is the nature of secrets? Well, what are secrets? Things that you keep to yourself, things that you withhold. And that is almost a contradictory idea to the notion of lions. Lions are easier to describe the symbolic meaning of. They are a regal, noble creature, an alpha predator who's, on top of the plains and Serengeti, the parts of Africa, wherever. And so they hunt in prides. There's a clear leadership and social structure, and you're all familiar with the Lion King and what's going on there. And that doesn't quite interact because they are, ostentatious and brazen creatures. Now, somewhat. If we're being literal, their coloring, just like another similar creature's, a tiger's coloring, helps them hide in the savannah. So it's not so stark, but they are majestic creatures. They look bold and regal and noble. King of England used them on his heraldry to represent his rule. So how does that mesh with secrets? Another possibility would be to consider the author's background if you want to look into it. Alberto Alvaro Rios is an Arizona author and poet who is still alive and very frequently writes about life and upbringing on the border, his life as a Mexican American. And this was a conscious effort on my choice to pick something that were relatable. I know Arizona is not exactly the same as Texas or wherever we might be, but he does give insight, and I would say he writes in a familiar way, and especially Secret Lion, as we get into the story, is quite familiar to what we go through growing up. And so this serves as, I think, to connect, people who might not be familiar with the particular group that he's writing about. So let's think of your first impressions after reading the story. The whole thing, like Love is a Fallacy, is in first person. So it's almost like a personal narrative of a real experience, and certainly this might make readers think that the narrator is Alberto Rios himself. It's an emotional, thoughtful, introspective piece that is also, not written from the point of view of a 12-year-old going through junior high and adolescence, but of someone looking back on what he went through. That being said, there are key bits of language that try and embody this. He, like many of us do at that age, have problems with authority and struggles with the rules and the changing worlds that happen. He rebels against this with his initial uses of profanity and cussing. And he starts out innocently and naively enough, asking what these words mean and why they shouldn't be used, and he just gets rebuked, which is not a satisfying answer to why you shouldn't do this, and has the normal expected result of making him think, well, I want to do it even more. There's changes and challenges to what he's going through because, again, the teachers aren't teaching like their name would imply, but they're babysitting basically. But they're not children. These kids need to learn, and they need to be guided. There's also briefly touched upon his first attraction to the opposite sex. Again, all of these are similar and familiar experiences to any reader of the story across any kind of racial or national line. Very few societies have, open or lax regard or rules for these sort of things. And, as an instructor, teacher myself in my history and my past, I understand why things might be restrictive, even if those do chafe with the students that you, as an older group of students, might relate to. I see it from both ways. So the key to this type of essay is to find passages that you will then summarize or even quote that embody some of these concepts or themes or ideas that you're trying to explore in the story. So initially I laid out a few ideas that stuck out to me. Now there are other impressions, but these have textual support and evidence. Again, there were teachers now, not just one, but teachers, and we felt personally abandoned somehow. So what this can do is both show his childish feelings of rejection and loss as a result of becoming, a junior high schooler, as opposed to having a third parent in the classroom. But it also, there's more subtleness going on there, subtlety. Again, it's a direct quote, so he plays with the sound of these words in the mouth, and so he's trying to get the tone of a child, even if he is writing a reflection from well after this. Another quote, we saw girls now, but they weren't the same girls that we used to know because we couldn't talk to them anymore. Not even the same way you used to, and certainly not to Sandy, even though she was my neighbor too. So again, how many of us grew up next to, another child, another kid, and they were just our friend? And this is where the idea of the girl next door comes from, at some point in time. Because if you dress a child a certain way, you can't tell what their gender is. And again, without going into gender dynamics too much, there's plenty of that to discuss in Love the Fallacy, as well as our King of the Hill show. Well, that's for my other class. I mean, the Bob's Burgers that I'm gonna have I had y'all analyze. At some point in adolescence, you become, you go through puberty, you become aware of who it is you're sexually attracted to, and then it becomes very easy to distinguish between the sexes, if not the genders. Things change even though they didn't really do it, even though everyone's going through this. I think of when I was, I don't know how many events I've gone to as a chaperone, as an educator, as a teacher, you'll see boys and girls at opposite sides of the dance hall when they're supposed to be socializing or whatever. Think of examples of when you've gone through similar things. So this longer quote over here, again, talks about the language, and there's really something meaningful and impactful going on there. All we used were small words, neat, good kid words. What were we really saying, but didn't know the words, was how much that ball was like that place. The whole Arroyo, couldn't tell anyone about it, didn't understand what it was, didn't have a name for it. It just felt good. It was just perfect in that way. It was that place, that whole going to the place, that whole junior high school line. So again, we get some insight into where the literal reference of the story is from. But he's grasping, he's fumbling with his language to try and describe, this place that they've discovered, this feeling, the best years of their life, which they eventually lose and have to look back upon, they can't rediscover. But he's trying to sound like a kid who doesn't know how to say that and speak to our emotions and let us fill in the blanks. Because in French, there's this phrase, je ne sais quoi, which means I don't know how you say it. Well, that could apply to the it factor. It could be applied to how he's laid it out here. Again, some more quotes. Something got taken away from us that moment. Heaven. We grew up a little bit and we couldn't go backward. We learned. No one ever told us about golf. They had told us about heaven and it went away. We got golf in exchange. So I ask you, think, what is a place that would be heaven-like for you? Are we pursuing it? Are we going after it? Do we live our life trying to be good enough to get there, or do we want to earn our way into it? Do we want to make paradise or luxury for us down here? Do we work hard? Do we struggle? Did we already find it, and has it been lost? Again, if you had a really good time in high school, college, whenever, at some point, you're in the best days of your life, and then afterwards, they're not coming back. They're gone. Hopefully you enjoyed them. Hopefully you appreciated them. I personally try and, always just look ahead, be hopeful. But I also know realistically that that's not going to be the case. That at some point I'll have more yesterdays and tomorrows, and it'll be about my time to consider whatever next phases of existence there may be. This ultimately is a story about the loss of innocence, and so I replace heaven with the talk of paradise, because the presentation of the Arroyo and what it is and what it turns out to be don't conflict with this. It's a place they can escape. It's a place where they can be free and enjoy themselves. The narrator and his friend are like two people in a park in the Garden of Eden or whatever, just having fun and doing their own thing. And they get kicked out in the way many people have been and are. So part of it is then that losing something that you can't put your words on, although, again, it's easy to explain and describe here. It's the loss of innocence. It's growing up. Now me, I don't like to idealize this so much because personally, well, I had a tough time growing up, what with the bullying and, you know, the pressure to be successful in school. And then later on, you know, I put maybe undue values on having fun with my friends and, you know, my girlfriend at the time. And so, you know, I was always kind of looking ahead to being grown up. And now that I'm grown up, I don't find myself looking back, but, you know, I'm still looking ahead to the life I could make for myself and what I might, you know, do. But it's just a more mature view of things as well, not to judge anyone, merely to say, you know, I'm not merely in existence for my own gratification. But there was at one time I was totally devoted to that. When I was younger, certainly, things get taken away. For the narrator, they had everything and they lost it, and they got golf in exchange. You also probably, as you've grown up and lived, find yourself thinking back to, you know, what might have been, and thinking if you could turn back time or go back in time. And so look at the next quote. We went back to the Arroyo for the rest of the summer, and we tried to have fun the best we could. We learned to be ready for finding the grinding ball. We loved it, and when we buried it, we knew what would happen. The truth is, we didn't look so hard for it. We were 2 boys in 12 summers then, and not stupid. Again, things get taken away, you lose them, and you can't go back again. When you get older, or if you're already older, think of going back to your high school, your junior high, your family home growing up. Something changes. Eventually, it's not your place anymore. I think like that for me when I was in grad school. San Marcos has changed in a relatively short period of time from when I was there, and it was changing still from the people who might be returning to see me there. So I'm going to tie things up right now and wind them down with this lecture. There's other ideas present, and feel free to comment to me or talk with me about what you think about the story. But just a few of the ideas present in the story. There's, of course, growing up, and what this entails is this getting responsibility, maturity, and agency over your life, or is it the loss of innocence? And if it's that thing, there's that fall from grace. Again, I think if we're thinking of stories that this is like I did with Secret Lion, Love is a Fallacy, this one's about the story of Genesis, you know. They're in heaven and they get kicked out. They're children and they get kicked out of childhood and they're forced to be teenagers, soon enough adults. And they didn't choose that, they didn't want that. So they're kind of innocent in what they've faced. One of my favorite artists and poets, William Blake, his collection, The Songs of Innocence, was then contrasted with the Songs of Experience. And the Songs of Innocence were childish, youthful displays of artistry and almost fairy tales, and then the Songs of Experience were very sinister, very truthful and realistic. What defines us when we grow up? Well, I think one thing present, and so this is why I've made it across all the stories, and that's a little hint for your essay yourselves, is you learn how things really are. Ultimately, irony and literature is meant to tell us that much, how things really are. And it takes a twisted, backwards, artistic, non-literal way to show us. This goes to the theme of appearances versus reality. Think of what the Arroyo turned out to be. Think of what the grinding ball used to be. Think of why lions are so special. So then the grinding ball was what they dubbed the lion, and it wasn't even any special or significance, but it was tough, it was round, they enjoyed it. They instilled with it, like we do every symbol, like we do every piece of currency, like we do every precious metal, value. They turned that arroyo into their paradise, and they lost it. They got reminded that they can't live in a world of their imagination. They have to play by the rules of the real world. There's a phrase for what this is. It's called Bildungsroman. That's a story about growing up. I figure I'd make this sound like an English literature class. And again, it talks about how life's unfair. We open with that, the unfairness and challenges they face early on. And then we close with that, with those brought about by social class. Think of what type of place they're at. A country club with a golf course. Well, usually golf is a luxurious, fancy sport. It takes up lots and lots of space, and that space has to be maintained lushly, beautifully, the green grass, the water, the sand traps. And normally there's exclusivity to it. You know, you have to be a member and you have to pay quite a bit, and you also have to have the time to take a break from work or school or class to go there and spend however long it takes to get through 9 holes or 18 holes. Think of how expensive a golf club set is. The grown-ups in the story are playing in the middle of the day when everyone else is working or should be at school. And they're allowed to play because of their standing, because they have the means to be members of that club. And so, this is one unfairness that the narrator and his friend face. So that's just a few ideas to talk about. Find out when you're reading your stories what speaks to you. If you see familiar themes that I've touched upon in any of these videos, explore them. Now, for your literary analysis yourself, you cannot write it over any of the stories we've discussed, but you can make references. You can say, whereas in Secret Lion they handled loss of an innocence one way, my story handles it this separate way. You might also then throw in how you feel about what you've gone through as well. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it.